Welcome back, everybody. Recently took in two more Ruger 44 carbine gunstocks for repair. Now I did a repair on one of these in a previous video, and I'm not gonna walk you through the whole repair on this, but I do want to talk a little bit more about why I used epoxy as opposed to wood glue, and also I need to go a little bit further with this one, and I need to faux out or paint out the repair so we can make it blend in and possibly disappear if we can get to that point. This is a gorgeous piece of American walnut. It's got a lot of figure on it. So for the work that I'm putting into it, because it is such a nice piece of walnut, that saving this is probably the right thing to do. Now, I used epoxy in this case because in my estimation it's a much better, stronger solution than wood glue, and there's a couple reasons that I believe that. First off, wood glue tends to be water soluble. So even though we're going to put finish over this and try to protect this, if this gun gets out into the rain or gets out into a lot of moist conditions, the chances of that wood glue letting go are higher than it would be if I'm using the epoxy. Other thing is that wood glue has the tendency to creep or to move over time depending on the stresses that go into it. And again, this gunstock needs to contain the air, the action, the barrel, so it has to be relatively stable or strong in its use over time. But the epoxy is rigid, it's solid. Once it makes that bond with the wood, the epoxy is not going to creep, it's not going to move, and it's not affected by moisture the way that the wood glue is. The downside to using the epoxy, even though I've used the clear epoxy, epoxy has dimension, it has thickness, it has film thickness. So when you put it on, you need to have enough of a film thickness that it can make that bond and then secure those two halves together. Now, wood glue requires a significant amount of pressure for that bond to adhere the way the glue is designed, whereas again, the epoxy has some fill characteristics, which is another reason why it can be used in a lot of applications. But again, as I said, the epoxy leaves a line. You can see the epoxy, and like I mentioned, even though it's clear, it still takes in the surrounding wood, and it gives it sort of a dark string line. All right. So even though I've got a nice strong repair, I do need to try and make that line disappear. So I want to talk through a little bit about how I'm going to faux this, or to paint away the line. So it may not disappear, but my objective is to make it less obvious to the casual eye. Now, after I had the repair completed and the epoxy had cured for 24 hours, I needed to do a couple things. The first off is I needed to take whatever residual or residue from the epoxy that was proud of the wood, and I needed to sand it down to the surrounding wood. So what I used was 600 grit sandpaper, because I'm going to sand down or sand over that existing finish, but I don't want to sand down through the finish or sand down through the color to get into the lighter wood below. So using the 600 grit paper and working very, very carefully, very cautiously, not sand down through that finish. I also have this walnut block that I made this years ago. I cut it into a size that's easy for me to hold and to manipulate. I milled one surface flat and then put a piece of rubber onto that flattened surface. And then by folding the sandpaper around it and sanding the wood, because of that flexibility to that rubber, it doesn't allow the wooden block itself to create hard lines in the surface. So the other reason that I used the 600 is I needed to rough up that original finish. I needed to give give it some porousness so that the finish that I'm adding, the color that I'm adding, has something to stick to. So I did all that, and that first go around, the line is pretty much, the line's pretty much gone. What you do get is the shininess from the epoxy, or that film thickness. You do see that through the surface of the finish. I need to make that disappear. Now there's several ways or several techniques that we can do. So I have these colored touch-up markers, and they come in a variety of color tones or wood tones. And I actually used those initially to get some of those really light spots darkened, because when I start to add the color, I want to make sure that the color blends throughout the entire length of that repair. The next thing I'm going to do is, when I begin to paint the faux or paint the color, you need to have a binding agent. So I actually use my standard finish, the finish that I mix up for duplicating a lot of these factory finishes. And then I'm going to add color in. So in this case, I just use standard painter's oil. So I'm using Winton, whatever oils you want to use, whatever manufacturer you think is the one that you're accustomed with or want to become accustomed with. That's all good. But I need to create wood tones, and I need to create varieties of wood tone in order to blend this in, because wood is not monochromatic. It is not one color throughout. And in this case, this has some strong colored grain lines, which I'm going to be able to use in the last coat or in the last layer to help blend these away and make them disappear. In this case, I'm going to use a reddish, I don't know what the hell, I don't know what the color of this is, but it's a dark red tone. I'm going to use white because it's the white that's going to help to blend down or soften whatever color I come up with. Burnt umber, and in this case, yellow ochre. Finally, I'm going to use a series of brushes. Depending on how large the surface is that I want to fill in will determine the size of the brush that I'm using. So I've got this smaller paintbrush that I'll use for drawing more hard lines, and then the larger brush will be used to fill in those broader areas. Then I have to, at the end, I have to blend those colors out. I have to blend them or soften them out into the surrounding wood. So I'll just use this very soft brush, and I'll just work around and make all of the colors blend. I mean, basically, again, wood doesn't have these hard lines. These lines are more natural, or these lines are natural in nature, so I want to try and replicate that as much as I can. I am not claiming to be a faux artist. There are people that are very, very good at this. Over the years, what I've learned to do, whether I'm doing gunstock repairs, or even when I build guitars, sometimes I'll have to go in and to manipulate the color of the grain, or maybe a repair, or again, whatever happens to that piece of wood that requires it to be faux or to be colored, so that those repairs disappear. And the techniques that I'm using are techniques that I've learned over the years. They come from studying the techniques of those faux artists, and using a lot of the materials that the faux artists use, and then just adapting them to the work that I'm doing here. So let me reset the cameras and take a look at this as I begin to color out this repair. So hey, if you want to see a video where I tell you how we made these gun stocks for the 44 carbine back in the day at Ruger, click on this video. And if you enjoy these videos on firearms restorations, you can click on this playlist and see the entire catalog. Thanks for watching. Click that bell, and I'll see you in the next one.